Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. I have 6 articles for you in this episode this morning. Here is off of opb.com, and it says, 2 occupiers found guilty of conspiracy for roles in the Oregon standoff. Federal jury has convicted occupiers Jason Patrick and Daryl Thorne on felony conspiracy charges for their roles in last year's armed takeover of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. Defendants Dwayne Emmer and Jake Ryan were acquitted of conspiracy but convicted on lesser charges. Emmer and Ryan were considered less prominent players in last year's 4-day occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in a remote part of eastern Oregon's high desert. The armed protest began January the 2nd of 2016 and ended when the final 4 occupiers surrendered to FBI on February the 11th during a dramatic conclusion that spanned over several hours and was broadcast on the internet. The verdict in this second trial comes after 3 weeks of testimony and more than 2 days of deliberations. All 4 were charged with conspiracy to impede federal employees through force, threats, and intimidation. The same charge the occupation leaders, brothers Emmon and Ryan Bundy, who were acquitted of during another federal trial last fall. Patrick also were charged with carrying a firearm in a federal facility. Ryan and Emmer were charged with depredation of government property. The jury delivered the following verdicts: Jason Patrick, guilty of conspiracy, not guilty of carrying a firearm in a federal facility. Daryl Thorne, guilty of conspiracy, guilty of carrying a firearm in a federal facility. Jake Ryan, not guilty of conspiracy, not guilty of carrying a firearm in a federal facility, guilty of depredation of government property. Dwayne Emmer, not guilty of conspiracy, guilty of depredation of government property. We are gratified that justice has been served and thank the jury for their service, Billy J. Williams, United States Attorney for the District of Oregon, said in a news release issued shortly after the verdicts were announced. And state are stronger because of our joint effort to bring these individuals to justice, and we as Oregonians can now begin to move past these unfortunate events. However, the second trial's verdicts mark a stark contrast to last year's trial, when a different jury acquitted 7 occupiers on all counts. My impression is that the jurors in this trial, prosecutors, were overreaching, and that their verdict was in some ways as much of a repudiation of the prosecution as it was a finding that the defendants were actually innocent, said Stephen Salzberg, a law professor at George Washington University. All understanding will be that the less culpable people were convicted and the leaders weren't. Some people will think that's not justice, but it turns out to be, in a particularly American way, the way we do justice here. Ren Cannon, the special agent in charge for the Portland division of the FBI, said criminal justice system isn't perfect, but it's the best one out there. I hope that everybody looks at it and will say, this is the American justice system functioning exactly as it's supposed to. You have a right to a jury by your peers, and that's going to mean there are differences in how decisions are met with similar fact patterns or overlapping fact patterns and evidence. That really is just a byproduct of a system that we've got that's as good a system as we've got in the world today. Harney County residents responded to the jury verdict with a muted enthusiasm. I have the same gut reaction as I did the first trial, said former county judge Steve Grasty, a vocal opponent of the occupation. The wheels of justice have turned. We have an outcome. Grasty added that he found it strange that 2 different juries arrived at different verdicts, but he also said he accepted both decisions and wants his community to move forward. Burns Paiute Councilman Jarvis Kennedy said he was pleased with the verdict. I was happy and excited that the people of Harney County and Burns Paiute tribe actually got some justice out of the second trial, unlike the first, Kennedy said. The occupation fueled a long-running debate about the federal government's role in managing public lands, largely in American West. Occupiers believe the federal government doesn't have the ability to own lands except for limited purposes outlined in the Constitution. Throughout the occupation, leader Ammon Bundy frequently said his goal was to shift the federally owned land to local control. During press conferences and the interviews, Bundy frequently said he wanted to get ranching, get the loggers back to logging, the miners back to mining. The prosecutors went even so far as to order signs renaming the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge as the Harney County Resource Center. In arguments in the trial, the government acknowledged there was no signed documents or recording. The occupiers' goal was to prevent federal employees from going to work. The federal prosecutors argued that there was more than enough circumstantial evidence for jurors to conclude that there was a conspiracy to block federal workers from their jobs at the refuge. In this case is about 4 defendants that went too far, U.S. Assistant Attorney Ethan Knight said during the government's closing arguments. Prosecutors also pointed to a December 29, 2015 meeting in Burns during which Ammon Bundy described a plan to occupy the refuge. The government's case relied heavily on testimony from law enforcement, largely FBI agents, but also several federal employees who worked at the refuge. Agents testified about their roles in processing evidence at the refuge, despite the occupation and follow-up investigations. Refuge employees work that they weren't able to do because of the occupation, as well as the deep sense of fear they felt the weeks leading up to and throughout the occupation. At my house, I had loaded guns at every door, refuge manager Chad Cargis testified. Normally, the guns are locked in a safe. Prosecutors spent hours showing jurors thousands of rounds of unspent ammunition and dozens of firearms investigators recovered from the refuge after the occupation. At one point during the government's case, U.S. District Court Judge Anna Brown told an FBI SWAT team member testifying as a witness for the government to be careful with guns in the courtroom. She said some jurors had expressed concerns during previous testimony where agents held up firearms in the courtroom. In order to be found guilty of conspiracy, the government occupiers intended to keep federal employees from going to work. During its case, the defense argued that was never the goal. Those on trial were protesting the way the government manages millions of acres of public lands and never intended to interfere with refuge workers. The thought was never given to the employees, Emmer's attorney said during her closing arguments to the jury. The defense argued that what they were doing at the refuge was protected by the First Amendment, and they said the presence of firearms was protected by the Second Amendment. Heard considerable testimony about the Hammond family as a reason for coming to occupy the refuge. Dwight and Stephen Hammond are 2 Harney County ranchers who are serving time in federal prison for arson. I think laws were broken, but the laws that the government has accused these men of violating were not broken, said Jesse Merrithew before the verdict. Merrithew said the 4 defendants were engaged in a protest. These men of violating are laws that were designed to prevent violence against federal officers who were trying to do their jobs, he said. They were not designed to prosecute people for engaging in activities. So there you have the outcome of the second trial. And that's not necessarily the outcome at this point, because I do believe they're planning to, this will be ongoing for quite a while. The next article, interject, the sentencing is supposed to be on next Wednesday, the best of my recollection. Next article here is off of Liberty Headlines, and it says, State pushes bill to allow government to confiscate guns without due process. people in our government who are determined to chip away at our Second Amendment rights, and they are an insidious bunch. Rarely do they make blatant gun-grabbing attempts. Typically, these that quietly set back gun rights. They like laws that merely set precedents without alarming the public, and they've been doing it successfully for decades. Let's see if I might be able to increase this a little bit. There we go. And get the ads off of it. The latest of these attempts comes from Illinois, one of the least gun-friendly states in America. State Senator Julie Morrison, a bill titled SB 1291, which would allow the government to confiscate firearms from citizens without any due process. According to Breitbart, one would create a lethal order of protection. Firearms of Illinois residents could be confiscated if a family member or law officer files a petition stating the gun owner poses an immediate and present danger of causing personal injury to himself, herself, or another in his or her custody or control. On summary states that the petition shall also describe the type and location of any firearm or firearms presently believed by the petitioner to be possessed or controlled by the respondent, provides that the petitioner may be a family member of the respondent or law enforcement officer who files a petition alleging the respondent possesses a danger of causing personal injury to himself, herself, or another by having in his or her custody or control, owning, purchasing, possessing, or firearm. Establishes factors that the court must consider before using a lethal violence order of protection. The issuance of parte orders and one-use orders. If the bill passes, then a resident of Illinois could have his or her firearms confiscated if a family member alleges that the person in question is an immediate threat to himself or others. File a petition and report that allegation to the government. I say under this bill, no real proof is required to take away someone's firearms. Moreover, the input and presence of the person who is targeted is not required during this process. If this happens to you, it wouldn't even be your word against theirs. You wouldn't be able to defend yourself in court at all. However, what may be more alarming about this bill is that it states a law enforcement officer can file one of these petitions. A cop could have your weapons confiscated on a whim. The gun grabbers in our society have tried to set a lot of bad legal precedents over the years. Let's pray that this doesn't become one of them. Of a biz pack, and it says, previously deported repeat criminal illegals kill again. Highlight desperate need for security. The death toll from illegal immigration continues to rise. Juan Jesus, a Mexican national in the United States illegally, is being held by ICE officials at the Columbia County, Georgia Detention Center on second-degree vehicular homicide charges, WJBF reported. On Monday, Castilla Reyes allegedly slammed into the back of a stopped vehicle, causing a chain reaction that resulted in a four-car accident. At Alexander's Earls, an airman stationed at nearby Fort Gordon died from his injuries. JBF, Columbia County Sheriff's Office Major Steve Morris says Castilla Reyes will be interviewed within the 48-hour window by ICE, and then a decision will be made to either remove the holder or upgrade to a full detainer. This comes after Astordo Alvarado, A 45-year-old Mexican national was charged with 5 felonies, including murder and gross vehicular manslaughter, in the death of 42-year-old Sandra Duran in a vehicle accident that took place on February the 19th, according to the LA Daily News. Alvarado, I guess his name is, was drunk and was speeding away from another crash when he hit Duran's vehicle. Perhaps the most tragic part is that Alvarado wouldn't even be in this country if Kate's Law was in effect. Reported a grand total of 5 times between 1998 and 2011 and had been charged with 20 felonies, including drug dealing, weapons possession, and trafficking before this latest incident, and yet he still keeps finding his way back into the United States. Echo other victims of legal immigration. The victim's sister, Lisa Morales, told the LA News, concerned because this could have been prevented. It's sad and it's unfortunate. It's going to happen not just to my family, but to other families. The good news is, the report indicated an unprecedented decline in illegal immigration since President Trump took office. It's a good start to help keep repeat criminals out of the country. Duran's father talks about the heartbreaking experience URL that they've listed here. So if you want to read about that, you can go to this URL and take a look at it. The next article I have is off of shtfplan.com. Preppers stuck in cities, elite chartering boats in case of Manhattan emergency. About blowing this up a little bit bigger. There we go. And get the hamster to work. There we go. Good morning. Hamster wants to sleep in. Is an inherent dilemma for most of the people living in cities. Even those who are aware of the extremely fragile fabric are often stuck living urban lives. Perhaps they plan to retire to a country abode or construct a hideaway to escape to if the need ever arises, but they're stuck in the city making a living. This is true even for the rich, but now they have a backup plan. The biggest of American cities and one of the most gridlocked is New York City. Long Island, both isolated islands trapped from the rest of the world. That's why and Forethought are now chartering emergency charters to get out of the city. Probably a good idea, especially if the helicopters is out of your price range. The New York Post reports a lot of people don't want to wait to get on a ferry, and they don't want to worry about walking off Manhattan as people had to do in the past. Chris Dowdy, co-owner of Plan B Marine, told the Post they know a boat is the fastest way, and we take the worry out of maintaining and preparing and always a vessel, he added. Not only does the company promise a speedy getaway, evacuation routes for each person depending on their personal needs. You don't have a captain. You have to drive this boat yourself, Dowdy told the Post, adding that in a crisis, people are more concerned with helping their own families than maneuvering someone else's escape vehicle. Evacuation service costs an annual fee of $90,000 and is catered toward wealthy individuals and corporations who don't have time to mastermind their own escape. Clients access the boats with an individual punch-in number, and should they need to abandon it at any time, Dowdy's company will locate it. Interesting concept, and the fact that the business model is also telling of the times. Have placed evacuations from major coastal cities at more than 24 hours. It says estimated evacuation times during major emergencies. For Long Island, where millions of New Yorkers live, it would be 20 to 29 hours to get off the island. During that time, People will lose their patience, run out of gas, become hungry, be denied access to medications and drugs, need emergency services, resort to crime, etc. Percenters have long been serious about their prepping, for they know too well about the very real dangers being constructed, and the house of cards that is ever poised to collapse. There has been a steady rise in the upper class investment to underground bunker communities, typically decked out with furnishings and amenities that nearly compare with above ground living. They have also been high profile investors buying up getaway farms in places like New Zealand or South America and hedging with mountain retreats and fortified safe rooms. Their spending remains mostly pocket change. For the biggest players, it represents a serious consideration of high risk for social disruption, chaos, and mega disaster, such as the collapse of the power grid. While the rich may be living the high life built in, there are many steps that the average and more modest individual can also take to increase your chances of survival during modest times. Who specializes in strategic relocation says that findings balance is a key. A permanent move isn't possible because of work, medical needs, or family life. Prepare for the same threats. It's a personal choice. Some folks think change is imminent. Others, a socioeconomic collapse, maybe an EMP, solar or military, or a worldwide pandemic. Everyone who is concerned with a potential disaster should perform a personal. It can to either relocate permanently to a rural homestead or acquiring a bug out survival property. Prepping, you have to always ask yourself, do they know something that I don't? Considering their access to power and their of human affairs, the chances are very good that they may. Boats and hideaway properties can be arranged at lower prices as well. If you're not on an island, there are probably some back roads that can save your life and keep you out of the major chaos. Plan your escape route with several alternate routes that avoid the major intersections with highways, bridges, and other points at which the majority of traffic is forced to flow at a slow, grinding, and dangerous pace. Be adapted to almost any space, and for relatively little money, and fortifications can be retrofitted. Just food for thought. Better now than too late. Something big is coming, and there's some video in this if you want to take a look at it. It's called Strategic Location and Home Security by Joel Saskin. So there's that information. The next one I have for you of csmonitor.com, Christian Science Monitor. And we'll blow this up a little bigger. There we go. Stephen Hawking calls for world government to stop. Speaking to the Times, physicist Stephen Hawking reiterated his view that artificial intelligence presents threats to abilities. One way to address this and other global challenges, he suggested world government. Physicist Stephen Hawking may be a proponent of artificial intelligence, but he has also been outspoken about the potential challenges it creates. In a recent interview, he sounded a similar tone and offered a solution that conservatives may find hard to accept. Times of London being awarded the honorary freedom of the City of London that was conferred to him on Monday, Professor Hawking expressed optimism for the future. He added, however, that artificial intelligence as well as other global threats. His answer? International action and possibly world government. To identify such threats and act before they get out of control, Hawking said. This might mean some form of world government. He cautioned, however, that such an approach might become tyranny. As role of artificial intelligence in society, Computer scientists and policymakers are moving from constructing these systems to harnessing their power for the good of society. On the nature and scope of AI-related challenges, there is widespread agreement that these impacts need to be addressed. Might world government provide a solution? Yes, I think much improved global governance may be necessary to deal with not only advanced AI, but also some of the other big challenges that lie ahead for our species, writes Nick Bostrom, a professor at the University of Oxford, who is the founding director of the university's Future of Humanity Institute, in an email to the Christian Science Monitor. I'm not sure we can survive indefinitely as a world divided against itself as we continue to develop ever more powerful instruments. AI is involved in seemingly everything it's behind, and the advances in vehicles. It powers Facebook ad screening process, and it interacts with people everywhere through virtual assistants like Apple's Siri and Amazon's Alexa. It is predicting fires, and in Britain, machine learning is being deployed to get people to pay their debts. Ultimately, it could even eradicate persistent social challenges like disease and poverty, Hawkins previously indicated. These unique opportunities come unique problems, observers suggest. Concern is about the economic transition to a world dominated by machines will look like. There are two main economic risks with this. First, that the mismatch may develop between the skills that workers have and the skills that future workplace demands. And second, that AI may increase economic inequality by increasing the return to owners and some higher skill workers. Edward Felton, a professor of computer science and public affairs at Princeton University, who is founding director of the university's Center for Information Technology Policy, tells the Monitor in an email. Those issues, he suggests, could be addressed by adopting public policies that will distribute the benefits of increased productivity. What Hawkins was more likely alluding to in his comment, however, are the concerns that AI will become hyper-powerful and start behaving in ways that humans cannot control. But not everyone is convinced that things of science fiction are necessarily eventuality. Professor Felton says he doesn't see any sound basis in computer science for concluding that machine intelligence will suddenly accelerate at any point. Amy Webb, founder and chief executive officer of the Future Today Institute, takes these threats more seriously. One of the goals of AI, she explains, is to monitor each machines to connect the dots for themselves in unsupervised learning systems. A lot of trust in these AI systems' ability to make the right decisions. She offers the analogy of a student learning math in the classroom. What happens if a student incorrectly learns the answer to 1 plus 1 is 3? Or try this again. And next group of kids, that wrong answer propagates, and other decisions are based on that knowledge. And the stakes are higher than in math class, she adds. We will be asking them to make decisions about personal identification, security, weapon deployment, and more. Bostrom frames the problem facing AI today as one of scalable control, how to ensure that an intelligent AI remains aligned with intentions of its programmers. Growing field of researchers addressing these problems. These commentators explain a world government or international harmonization of AI laws may be one approach. Though Bostrom says he does not expect any imminent transformation in global affairs, world government may be the next phase of political aggregation. Come most of the way from hunter-gatherer band to chiefdom to nation state to the present mesh of states and international institutes, he writes. We are there. Though she agrees that international cooperation would be valuable, is skeptical it will happen soon enough to address immediate issues. It would be great for all countries around the world to agree on standards and uses for AI, but at the moment, we can't even get unilateral agreement on issues like climate change, she points out. Time for international government cooperation to catch up with AI development, she says. May also be affected by unexpected changes in human behavior as AI becomes more ambiguous, notes Scott Wolfson, president, senior fellow at the Technology Policy Institute, in an email. Safer cars based on AI cause people to respond by acting more recklessly, like crossing against a light if they believe cars will automatically stop? Dr. Walston asked. With that in mind, he suggests effective policy solutions at local, national, or international level should start with more research into the effects of AI. Any initiatives to address potential challenges need to be based on a solid undertaking of what problems need to be solved in a way that makes sense, he concludes. So there you have that information. But I think they were right on that one part about, 1 + 1 = 3, and then it teaches the same thing. So that, that's what we've been going through in our school systems. We've got professors and teachers teaching liberalism and socialism to the students instead of what the country is really based on, constitutionality. So, that's why we're in such a snowflake society now, and then turn it all over to artificial intelligence. Final article in this episode is off of kwwl.com, and it says, the latest 3 households near derailment allowed to go home. And this is little bitty, teeny tiny type in this one. And blow it up. There we go. That's much better. This is out of Iowa. It says the latest on a fiery derailment of a freight train in northwest Iowa. On this are local, and it goes in reverse. So, well, I guess the best place is always to start at the beginning, okay? The beginning is at the end of this, so we'll go there. 9:50 a.m., authorities say several fuel tank cars are burning after a freight train possibly carrying ethanol derailed in northwestern Iowa. The Palo Alto County Sheriff's Office says the derailment occurred at 1 a.m. Friday near Great Endure, I guess is the way it's pronounced, 160 miles northwest of Des Moines. It says 2 crew members escaped. No injuries have been reported. The office says the train was carrying alcohol from an ethanol plant. It didn't elaborate. Palo Alto County Emergency Management Director Mark Hunefeld says at least 27 of the 110 cars derailed, including the burning tanks loaded with ethanol. Residents are evacuating the area. Company spokeswoman Rachel Espinoza has confirmed it's a Union Pacific train. Nation Safety Board spokesman Keith Holloway says the agency will investigate the cause of the derailment. It goes to 10:20 a.m. A spokesman for the ethanol producer says the train that derailed and burst into flames in northwestern Iowa was carrying ethanol from that company's plant. Green Plains Incorporated spokeswoman Sasha Forson, tank cars were filled with ethanol at a Green Plains plant in Superior, Iowa. She declined to say where the train was headed. Green Plains is based in Omaha, Nebraska. The Palo Alto County Sheriff's Office says the derailment occurred at 1 a.m. Friday near Grittinger House, southeast of Superior. It says 2 crew members escaped unharmed. No injuries have been reported. Residents are evacuating the area. Palo Alto County Emergency Management Director Mark Hunefeld said at least 27 of the 101 cars derailed. And at 12:15 p.m., environmental experts are checking for ethanol leaks after a fiery freight train derailment in northwest Iowa, while fire officials are allowing the blaze to burn itself out. The Palo Alto County Sheriff's Office says the derailment occurred at 1 a.m. Friday near Grittinger, Iowa National Resources Field Office. Supervisor Ken Hennessians, and I'm kind of guessing at that. I mean, they even have the pronunciations after these names on these things. I can't even make sense out of this. But it says he doesn't yet know if any ethanol leaked from 27 tanker cars that derailed. Each carries about 25,000 gallons. County Emergency Manager Mark Hunefeld says it appears that 5 of the derailed cars fell into a creek. Flows through relatively flat farm fields and empties a few miles downstream into the Des Moines River. And at 2:15, Transportation Safety Board says it's spending some time. I'm sorry, wow. Try that again. The National Transportation Safety Board says it's sending some of a 15-member investigative team from the site of a fatal train collision on the Mississippi coast to rural northwest Iowa to look into a derailment that caused an ethanol fuel fire. A news release Friday from the NTSB says some members of the team will be coming from Biloxi, Mississippi, where the agency is investigating a Tuesday crash. Texas tour bus was hit by a freight train at a crossing, killing 4. Other members of the investigative team heading to Iowa will come to NTSB headquarters in Washington. 3:45 p.m. An Iowa Department of Natural Resources official says the fire from the derailment of train shipping ethanol through northwestern Iowa was still burning nearly 15 hours after it began. Office Supervisor Ken Henson, I'm trying to make sense of how this is supposed to be pronounced. Hessenians, okay, said Friday afternoon that there was a pretty big explosion around 2:30 p.m. at a site near. Hessians said he, and now that doesn't make any sense. Hessian said officials expected the fire burned out Saturday. I think that's the officials. Okay, that would make more sense. Hensian said the officials expected the fire to have burned out by Saturday, allowing the investigators and railroad crews to better assess the damage then. He says it did not appear any significant amounts of ethanol had spilled into a creek at the derailment site after the agency checked downstream. Hensian said a water sample from the creek hadn't yet been lab tested, but said the water appeared uncontaminated after a smell test. Let's drink a cup of it and see what he thinks. The next one is, or the next time up here is 5:40 p.m. The Palo Alto County Sheriff's Office says residents of 3 households that were evacuated near the site of a train derailment and fire in northwest Iowa have been allowed to return home. The department says the 3 homes were a half a mile from the site where the ethanol fueled fire was still burning late Friday afternoon. The derailment occurred around 1 a.m. Friday near Grittinger, about 160 miles from Des Moines. It sent 27 tanker cars, each carrying 25,000 gallons of ethanol, off the tracks. It says 2 crew members escaped unharmed. No injuries had been reported by Friday evening. So that article, and now 5 cars fell into the river, and now they're saying that they don't think that the water got contaminated. Something wrong with that. That's all I have for you in this episode, but we'll bring you another episode yet. So stay tuned. If you like what I'm doing here, give it a thumbs up. Share it on your social media so everybody gets to enjoy the news. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Informed.